Ever tell ghost stories as a kid? Huddled around with a flashlight trying to scare each other.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That feeling of chills,
Hmm.
kind of the thrill of the unknown.
Yeah,
I think it stays with a lot of us even as we get older.
for sure, for sure.
I mean, over 40% of Americans say they believe in ghosts.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And today we're going deep into the world of two people who made a career and a legacy, really, out of investigating these paranormal events.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Ah, the Warrens. No, those are names that send shivers down your spine, for sure.
Right, like they're icons in the paranormal world, but were they really gifted investigators or were they just really good storytellers?
Yeah, you gotta wonder sometimes with all those chilling tales and demonic forces, how much was real and how much was for show.
That's what we're going to try to figure out.
Sounds like a fascinating deep dive.
To get to the bottom of it, we're going to be looking at an episode of the You're Wrong About podcast.
Oh, I like that podcast.
Yeah, it's great. And this one features Jamie Loftus. She really digs into Ed and Lorraine's lives from when they were young in Connecticut to their rise as, these big paranormal figures.
I'm ready to hear all about it.
So let's get started.
All right, let's do it.
We have to go back to the 1930s to start their story.
Okay, way back.
Picture a young Ed growing up super Catholic and claiming to see ghosts all the time.
Interesting.
And then there's Lorraine, just a teenager, when she says she discovered she's clairvoyant.
Wow. So both of them with these early paranormal experiences.
Yeah, and it seems like those experiences really set the stage for their future.
It makes you wonder how much those early beliefs shaped their whole approach to the paranormal.
Right. Like Ed, the boy who saw ghosts, becomes the demonologist, and Lorraine, with her sixth sense, becomes this bridge between the spirit world and us.
It's like their roles were almost preordained.
And they weren't content with just observing the paranormal, they wanted to understand it, document it, even make a living off of it.
No, that's entrepreneurial spirit.
That's right. So in 1952, they founded the New England Society for Psychic Research.
Okay, so they made it official they were ghost hunters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they had this very unique way of getting into people's homes to investigate.
Oh, how'd they do that?
Ed was a really good artist, so he would sketch a house,
Okay.
and that would give him a reason to knock on the door. And Lorraine would come along and offer to sell the drawing.
Oh, liar.
Yeah, and while they were there, they casually ask about any, strange things happening in the house.
I see. So they used art as their way in.
Exactly. And people back then maybe were a little more trusting, more open to the idea of the paranormal.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it worked. They started building this reputation, investigating hauntings, sometimes even helping the police, or so they said. And they even did what they called psychic diagnoses.
Psychic diagnoses, what's that?
I don't know exactly, but it sounds intriguing, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But of some of their early big cases that really made them famous.
Like what?
Well, there's the case of Annabelle the doll.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. Super creepy.
Right. They claimed this Raggedy Ann doll was possessed by a demon.
A demon in a doll, that's terrifying.
It is, and it really captured people's imaginations. But here's the thing.
What?
The real Annabelle doll, it was just a regular cloth doll. Nothing like the scary one you see in the movies.
So how much of that story was real and how much was exaggerated?
Exactly. And, it makes you wonder, did they embellish things to make the story more dramatic?
I guess that's the question, isn't it?
And then there's the West Point haunting.
West Point, like the military academy.
Yep, the very same.
Wow, so they investigated a haunting at West Point.
They did. And,
Oh.
West Point is this place of logic and discipline. So their investigation there actually gave them some credibility.
That's interesting that a place like that would even entertain the idea of a haunting.
I know, right? But it seemed to legitimize their work for a lot of people.
I guess even the most skeptical institutions can have their ghost stories.
True, but not all of their cases were so cut and dry.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, there's the Lindley Street poltergeist case.
What happened there?
Yeah. It involved a young girl who they said was possessed.
Oh, wow.
And it makes you think about, the possibility of exploitation.
In what way?
Well, imagine this young girl. Maybe she's already dealing with bullying or insecurities, and then suddenly everyone's saying she's possessed by a demon.
Yeah. That's a lot for a child to handle.
Right. And it makes you wonder, was she really possessed, or were people just taking advantage of her vulnerability?
That's a disturbing thought.
It is, and it reminds us that sometimes the scariest things aren't supernatural, they're human.
Very true.
And speaking of scary, there's another very famous case the Warrens were involved in.
Which one is that?
It's the one they call the Devil Made Me Do It case.
Oh, wow. That sounds intense.
It involves Arne Cheyenne Johnson.
Okay, and what did he do?
Well, he murdered his landlord.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and get this, his defense was demonic possession.
You're kidding.
Nope, that was his actual defense in court.
It sounds like something out of a horror movie.
Right. Like a man commits murder and blames it on a demon.
That's why.
And the Warrens were right there in the middle of it all, lending their expertise to the case.
So what did they say? Did they think he was really possessed?
Well, Lorraine especially played a big role in the case. She claimed she had actually foreseen the murder.
Hold on, she predicted it.
That's what she said, which added this whole other layer of creepiness to it.
Wow. So her prediction basically supported the whole demonic possession claim.
Exactly. But, some people were skeptical about her predictions.
Why is that?
Well, they seem to always conveniently align with the defense's narrative.
I see. So it raised questions about, were her predictions genuine or was there something else going on?
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated when you consider the other people involved in the case.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, Johnson's wife, she fully believed he was possessed, but then the young boy, who they said was the original host of the demon, he told a totally different story.
So you have these conflicting accounts, which makes it even harder to know what really happened.
Right. Who do you believe? Was Johnson truly convinced he was possessed? Or was it all just a way to avoid taking responsibility for what he did?
That's a tough question.
It is, and the fact that the Warrens made money off this case, through book deals and movie rights, it just adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about their motives. Were they really trying to help or were they just exploiting the situation?
That's a really troubling thought, and it leads us to some even darker aspects of the Warrens' story, things that really cast a shadow over their legacy.
Oh, wow. What are you talking about?
Well, there are some very serious allegations against Ed Warren, specifically claims of an inappropriate relationship with a woman named Judith Penny.
I haven't heard about this.
It's pretty disturbing. Penny says she was Ed's mistress for decades, starting when she was underage.
What? That's awful.
Yeah, and she claims she was also his ghost hunting assistant during that time.
Wow, so she was involved in their work too.
She was, and she even filed a lawsuit against the Warren estate and Warner Brothers, the studio behind the Conjuring movies.
A lawsuit? What was that about?
Well, it seems Lorraine had this contract with Warner Brothers that specifically prohibited them from showing anything about Ed's alleged infidelity in the films.
So they were actively trying to control their public image, even if it meant hiding some potentially damaging information.
It seems that way, and it makes you wonder what else they might have been trying to keep secret.
Yeah, that's a little unsettling.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Because it reminds us that behind this carefully crafted persona of paranormal investigators, the Warrens were real people with flaws and secrets, and maybe even a much darker side than they let on.
So it's not as simple as just saying they were heroes or villains.
No, it's much more complicated than that, and their story really makes you think about how we view and consume paranormal entertainment. Are we celebrating people who may have done some pretty terrible things?
That's a good question, and it's something we should all be mindful of.
As the Warrens' career went on, they seemed to shift their focus more towards building their legacy.
How so?
Well, they created the Warren Occult Museum.
I've heard of that it's full of all these creepy artifacts from their investigations, right?
Exactly, and it became a popular spot for people fascinated by the paranormal.
Yeah, I see why it would be a big draw.
Right, but knowing what we know now about the Warrens, it's hard to look at those artifacts without feeling a little skeptical.
I get it. You start to wonder how much of it is real and how much is just part of their carefully constructed story.
Exactly, like peeling back layers of a facade to see what's really underneath.
So the question remains, were they true believers or were they just really good at creating a captivating narrative?
And that's the question we're going to continue exploring as we dive deeper into the world of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
I'm ready for more. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
It really does feel like you're stepping into a horror movie with that case.
Right, and the Warrens, they were right there in the middle of it.
So what was their take on the whole thing?
Well, Lorraine, she was a big part of the case.
How so?
She claimed that she had actually seen the murder happen before it even happened.
Whoa, hold on. She had a vision of the murder.
That's what she said, yeah.
So it's like she was saying it was destined to happen.
In a way, yeah, and of course that made the whole thing even creepier.
It would. Yeah, but some people weren't so sure about her predictions.
Exactly. There were a lot of skeptics who thought maybe her predictions were a little too convenient, always seeming to line up with whatever the defense was saying.
I see. So it made people wonder if maybe she was influencing things more than just predicting them.
Right. And then you have the other people involved in the case who had their own versions of events.
Oh, right. I remember you mentioned that, like, the young boy who they said was the first one possessed.
Exactly. He had a completely different story than Johnson and his wife.
So who do you believe?
It's tough to say for sure. I mean, was Johnson genuinely convinced he was possessed? Or was he just desperate to avoid responsibility for what he did?
Yeah, that's a really heavy question.
It is. And the fact that the Warrens profited from this case, through book deals and movie rights, it just makes things even murkier.
It does make you wonder about their motivations, for sure.
And that brings us to some of the more troubling aspects of the Warrens' story. Things that really cast a shadow over their legacy.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, there are these allegations against Ed Warren. It's pretty serious ones.
Oh, what kind of allegations?
Allegations of an inappropriate relationship with a woman named Judith Penny.
I don't think I've heard about this.
Yeah, it's not something that's talked about a lot, but Penny claims that she was Ed's mistress for decades.
Wow. And what's even more disturbing is that she says it started when she was underage.
Exactly. And she was also working as his ghost hunting assistant during that time.
Wow. So she was really involved in their world.
She was. And she eventually filed a lawsuit against the Warren estate and Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers, as in the movie studio.
The same one.
Why would she sue them?
Well, it turns out that Lorraine had a contract with Warner Brothers that specifically said they couldn't portray Ed's infidelity in any of the Conjuring movies.
So they were actively trying to keep that part of their lives hidden.
It seems that way, and it makes you wonder what else they might have been trying to conceal.
It definitely raises some red flags.
It does, and it reminds us that the Warrens weren't these perfect paranormal heroes that they're often portrayed as.
Right. They were real people with flaws and secrets and maybe even some very dark ones.
Exactly. And it makes you question the whole idea of celebrating them and their work.
It's a complicated issue for sure.
It is. And as the Warrens got further into their careers, they seemed to shift their focus towards creating a lasting legacy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they founded the Warren Occult Museum.
Oh, yeah, the one with all the spooky artifacts, right?
Yep, that's the one. And it became this huge attraction for people fascinated by the paranormal.
It makes sense. I mean, who wouldn't want to see objects that were supposedly involved in all these famous hauntings?
Right. But knowing what we know now about the Warrens, it's hard to look at those objects without a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah, you start to wonder how much of it is real and how much is just part of their carefully crafted narrative.
Exactly like peeling back the layers of a facade to see what's really underneath.
So the question remains, were they true believers or were they just incredibly skilled at building a compelling story?
And that's the question we're going to keep grappling with as we continue our deep dive into the world of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
You know, after looking at all of this, it really makes you think, what can we learn from their story?
That's a good question. I mean, it's definitely a story about the power of belief and, that fascination with the unknown, and also how easily the lines between fact and fiction can get blurred.
Right, and I think it's a good reminder that we need to be a little skeptical sometimes.
Oh, for sure, especially when it comes to the paranormal.
Yeah, we can't just take everything at face
Yeah.
value. We have to, consider the source, their motives, the potential for, things to be exaggerated or even completely made up.
And remember, the Warrens built their whole careers on telling captivating stories. But were those stories always the whole truth?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is, and it makes you wonder how much of their success was due to, genuine insight or talent, and how much was just good marketing and showmanship, maybe even taking advantage of people's fears and vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it's something to think about, especially after watching one of the Conjuring movies.
It really puts a different spin on those films, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you see them in a whole new light.
So at the end of the day, what are we left with?
A pretty complicated legacy. I'd say one that's both fascinating and disturbing at the same time.
Were they true believers, or were they just really good at playing the part? Did they genuinely help people, or were they exploiting them?
Maybe there isn't a simple answer. Maybe it's a bit of both.
The Warrens were human, after all, with all the complexities and contradictions that come with being human.
Exactly. And I think the most important thing we can take away from all of this is the importance of critical thinking.
Of not just blindly accepting everything we hear.
Right. We need to be careful consumers of information, especially in a world where, sensationalism often gets more attention than the truth.
So don't be afraid to ask questions. Do your own research and come to your own conclusions.
That's great advice. And if you're interested in learning more about the Warrens, there's tons of stuff out there. Books, documentaries, articles, you name it.
So go explore, weigh the evidence, and see what you think.
It's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
It is, and I think it's a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling truths aren't found in haunted houses or demonic possessions, but in ourselves.
That's a deep thought.
It is, and it makes this whole exploration of Ed and Lorraine Warren all the more thought-provoking.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of the Warrens.
Thanks for taking us on this journey. It's been really interesting.
Of course, and everyone listening, remember to subscribe to the deep dive for more explorations into the topics that make you think, make you question, and maybe even keep you up at night.
We'll see you next time.
Until then, stay curious and stay skeptical.